Matt, we have Steve Witkoff together with Kushner. They were negotiating in the Middle East. And we know what's going on with the so called peace plan in the Middle East and their plan for Gaza. And basically, what they have done and what they're talking about is what's in it for me. How
Hmm.
can we get from what's going on with the situation in Gaza? How we can benefit from the situation? And I'm afraid it could be the case for the war in Ukraine. These two guys are negotiating, but after all, diplomacy. We know how important, for example, when you have, Lavrov negotiating with the United States is totally different from you having Kirill Dmitriev talk with Americans. These are not diplomats. These are not trained to solve the issues. These are, somehow they know how to deal with each other when it comes to their sort of negotiations in terms of the economy, but they have no clue when it comes to having, reaching a permanent solution, somehow a sustainable solution for the conflict in Ukraine.
Right, right. You know, my colleague Karen Kiyotowski, she describes Trump's foreign policy as profit-seeking, cronyism, and deceitful wars. And I think that's a good summarization of what we're dealing with here in terms of the personalities involved, what they're looking for. Certainly, this understanding of what am I getting out of it? How do we line our pockets? And we saw that in the first draft of this peace proposal, this idea that $100 billion would be taken and this was in a 28-point plan. $100 billion would be taken from Russian frozen assets, and it would be invested in reconstruction in Ukraine, and that the Russians and the Americans would split the profits. So, I mean, you go back and look at that 28-point peace plan. The idea of profits dominates the section on reconstruction. Normally that's something that's hidden. So anyone who's familiar with the development industry knows how dirty it is, knows how corrupt it is, knows how so much of that money just ends up back in American banks and American companies and eventually in American political campaign coffers. But the here they're saying it out loud, right? They weren't even trying to hide it. Normally, a reconstruction program of that magnitude, oh gosh, the vultures that would be circling, type of thing. What as it says in the Gospel of Luke, right? What does Jesus say? Where the dead be, thereby vultures gather, right? And that's certainly something that I think articulates the American view towards reconstruction, post-war reconstruction, however it's phrased. So, this idea that yes, they want to line their pockets, that what's in it for me dominates their thinking. We've seen that expressed in Ukraine. We've seen that expressed since the beginning of this war that started in 2022. I know it started 2014, but just in the idea of the American banks that went to Ukraine and essentially got commitments to be the ones who are going to rebuild Ukraine after the war, right? I'm not sure where that stands now, but certainly you saw that early on in this, the profit taking that was going to be, and who are these banks? Well, they're the friends, the cronies of the Biden administration, right? I mean, so we see how this is all this war, like all wars, are a racket. In the immortal words of Marine Corps General Smedley Butler, I think it's very clear the idea of the profit seeking of what's in it for me by the Trump administration with the Gaza plan, which also negotiated by Witkoff and Kushner. And I think that's even more explicit. This idea of monetizing 70% of the Gaza coastline, as was revealed in a Wall Street Journal story a week or so ago. The idea that is the plan is called Project Sunrise, and it foresees this investment that yields tremendous profits. And whether or not the Palestinian people are involved is not even secondary or tertiary to these people. So the idea of conquest here, whether it come through the literal obliteration of a people like the Palestinian people in Gaza, or in the sense of being the decision maker, the kingmaker, however you want to describe it, of the United States in the Ukraine Russia negotiations. I don't think anyone disputes the idea that the Americans are the ones who can decide the fate of this thing. Certainly, not saying the Russians and Ukrainians don't have agency, but the United States is such an important, such an important factor in all this that it really is up to the Americans how this goes forward. And again, the Russians can walk away anytime. The Ukrainians can do as they wish. The Europeans are certainly doing their best to sabotage this, etc. But the primacy of the Americans in this, well, that is a form of, well, because we are this dominant factor for the American leadership through Trump, Witkoff, Kushner. Well, that means we should get spoils, right? I mean, so you see this grotesque profit taking, cronyism, deceitful wars, as Karen would say, that define and really help you understand Trump foreign policy, not as it's expressed in the national security policy that was put out a few weeks ago, but as it's actually expressed in action, whether it be military action like we're seeing impending in Venezuela, or diplomatic action, whether it be Ukraine or Palestine. I will say this one thing that I think that is really uh, notable about uh, what's happening in Ukraine and Russia in terms of negotiations is the role of the United States as both a belligerent and as the mediator, right? So this idea that the United States is a belligerent in the conflict, but it's also the mediator. I'm not sure if I'm aware of a conflict, a war, a situation where you had that type of setup like we see here. And of course, I think a lot of us have trepidations about that. But as of now, as we are saying, it's led to the point under the Trump administration where maybe there will be an end to this war, or at least some form of peace.
It doesn't matter how many times Donald Trump repeats that this is Biden's war. We know this is this war started in 2014 with the Obama administration, then the Trump administration, Biden administration, Donald Trump 2.0 right now. But do you feel that they're doing the same? The Trump administration is doing the same in Taiwan by sending more weapons to Taiwan?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I think the Trump administration with Taiwan, in the same way that they were in the first part, are pushing the bounds here. That they're doing everything to provoke. That they're doing everything they can to satisfy those in Washington D.C. who do want war and feeling that they can manage it and bring it right up to the lines. The idea of we're going to push, we're going to provoke, we're going to poke the Chinese for our political domestic benefit. Absolutely. I think that's what you saw happen with the Obama administration. When I was in Washington, D.C. In 2014, 2015, involved in some efforts on Capitol Hill, and you could see the Obama administration, the scratch marks on the door jam as the Obama administration is getting pulled further and further into this conflict with Russia. Chiefly from whether it's the weapons industry that wants this, the fossil fuel industry, the Europeans that want it, and also, too, most importantly, members of Congress who were ravenous for it. And you see that now with China. We've seen it for decades. But, in this last national defense authorization that was just, passed in the last few weeks, there is legislation as part of the NDA that directs the Department of Defense to send more ships through the Taiwan Straits. This idea of sending these freedom of navigation patrols, as they call them, which is simply just going and poking the Chinese, right? I mean, this idea of go out there and see if you can get into a fight, kind of thing. This is, I think, something that the Americans, I should say it like that, many Americans in Washington, D.C. have wanted for a very long time. The idea that China should be our next enemy is nothing new. If you go back and look at the mid 90s, the rise in concern, if you want to call that, by American leadership, foreign policy leadership about China is there. And certainly the way that the Clinton administration transitions to putting an emphasis on the Pacific, highlighted, of course, with flare-ups over Taiwan, including sending two aircraft carrier battle groups up to China's shoreline, essentially, and saying, "What are you going to do about it?" That impact on the Chinese, has led us to this point we are now. If people remember Condoleezza Rice, when she comes into office as George W. Bush's national security advisor in 2001, she says that China is the primary concern of the United States. Osama bin Laden and Al Qaeda had something else to say about that, of course. Right? I mean, Barack Obama, his Asia pivot, this was supposed to define his second administration. The Asia pivot under Obama is more or less uh, 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 canceled, if you will, because, of course, Al Qaeda and the Islamic State in Syria have other things to say about that, right? I mean, so, I bring up those 2 points, though, just to always remind people that so much of the reality of this world is made through the United States making, right? So the 2001 September 11 attacks, it's a direct consequence, a direct blowback of American foreign policy over the decades. Of course, the situation in Syria, whether it's that ruinous, horrible, awful civil war or the reality of Islamic State, that's all consequence of America's actions. So the Americans who want to pivot and start this new conflict with China keep getting frustrated by this old conflict that they've created, right? And particularly if you go back to the genesis of Al Qaeda and the reason for that conflict with Al Qaeda, it goes back, it's a Cold War legacy. Al Qaeda exists because of our war with the Soviet Union. So, I mean, the idea that the Americans can't get out of their way and the reality that the legacy of their action carries on for decades, the blowback is just not a one time occurrence. And it spans through generations. I don't think that's something that the United States really fully has understood. But certainly the rhetoric about China, the discussion, the obsession with China is there in the United States, in Washington, throughout Congress. And I don't think Donald Trump wants to get into a war with China, but I think his administration likes the idea of, again, somehow pushing the bounds of it, poking the Chinese, getting domestic political benefits from this, pleasing the various constituencies in Washington, D.C. that want war or at least like the idea of war with China. And of course, that may very well deliver the war that they fantasize about. And, I think almost all of us, right, Nima, including I feel probably most folks who are listening and watching us right now, would agree that the United States doesn't have a chance in hell in a war with China. We wouldn't be able to survive after a few weeks. At the wherewithal of the Chinese in terms of their industrial capacity would just eventually overwhelm the Americans. I don't care about how great one size technology is or the other. The fact that Chinese haven't fought a war in however many decades and they don't have the experience, none of that matters. Will come down a war like that to industrial capacity, measured not over years, but in months. And I think that would be the reality of it for the Americans in a loss in a war with China.
Yeah. Matt, looking at the Middle East and the West Asia today, it seems to me so much of change, so much strange somehow. When you look, when you see Saudi Arabia is attacking, two ships of UAE weapons going to Yemen, I have never thought that these two countries can attack each other. And not just Saudi Arabia and UAE, you look at Netanyahu going to Cyprus together with Greece, somehow making some sort of coalition. On the other hand, Erdogan is going to be here in Iran and talking with Iranian officials. What is happening to the Middle East, in your opinion, and how this sort of endless wars is changing the face of the Middle East? Because, in my opinion, what's going on within the Arab states, considering the foreign policy, somehow after the attack on Doha, various calculations are somehow modified. They're modifying their calculations right now.
Right. I think, well, and don't forget another big thing that's happened in the last week or so is that a massive natural gas deal between Israel and Egypt, where Egypt's going to buy, what, $35 billion worth of gas, excuse me, from Israel. I think these are the consequences of the last 2 years of war, whether it be war, whether it be the genocide in Gaza, whether it be Lebanon, Syria, strikes on Iraq, of course, the war with Iran, the battles with the Houthis, and that the United States and the Israelis have come out dominant, and particularly the Israelis. The Americans, I think, have learned a lesson of being overextended. And we tie this back to just talked about with China, but no, I shouldn't say they've learned a lesson. They should learn a lesson about being overextended. But I don't know if those, as Larry Wilkerson likes to quote Barbara Tuchman, the wooden headedness of Washington D.C. has been penetrated by reality. The I think what you've seen is, regrettably, strategic success by the Israelis. Now, there's all kinds of issues with Israel internally that might be its undoing. So we can talk about that otherwise. But at least geopolitically, on a regional front, the dominance of the Israelis is clear. And I think most nations are recognizing that. Now, where that will go, we have to see. I mean, certainly said it before. Why the Turks haven't started getting a nuclear weapon yet, I don't understand. I don't know. Very well could happen. Other nations as well, But the idea that the Israelis are establishing a degree of primacy, in a large part due to the backing of the United States, is evident. And I think what you're seeing then, in terms of the willingness of nations to work with Israel, recognizing the reality that's in front of them, right? So this includes things, such as been reported about increased military ties between Gulf states and the Israelis. Working through the Americans, but in a way that no way you would have thought possible even 5, 6 years ago. I think there's that recognition. What comes with that then, it's curious. It is this bombing by the Saudis of the of STCs, of the Southern Transitional Council's vehicles. And if people, I think, who follow this will know, they saw the video of that, all those white pickup trucks, and it's just as a aside, we still have never figured out where all those white pickup trucks come from. Seen them all my life in these conflicts, and but uh, yeah, this idea that the Saudis would attack the STC, which is clearly an Emirati allied organization, and then the Emiratis pull out of Yemen as well. Okay, there's something happening here in terms of a balancing of power, and in terms of maybe the Emiratis not wanting to be overextended. Certainly, I think with Yemen, we get into particulars about Yemen. The STC have recently taken large parts of the two eastern parts of Yemen. They want to declare independence, make their own South Yemen. That's something that the Saudis do not want. So, did the Emiratis know this was coming? And did the Emiratis understand that, okay, the STC is going too far, the pushing the bounds of what the Saudis want here? This isn't worth it for us. We're not that wedded to the idea of controlling Yemen. We'd rather have better relations with the Saudis. Let the Saudis bomb these guys, try and get some control. Is that what, let the Saudis deal with Yemen? Is that what the Emiratis are saying at this point? It's not worth it for us, possibly. But you're seeing a shift in the region because of the last 2 years of the genocide. And of course, if you go back and you look at the root causes, the fundamental reasons for why Al Aqsa flood took place, why the Palestinian resistance carried out those attacks on October 7th, the geopolitical realities that were being forced upon the Palestinians by the Abraham Accords really were a prime motivation. There are many other motivations too, but that was a prime issue for the Palestinians. This idea that we're being left behind. All these nations are signing up for the Abraham Accords. The Trump administration, well, at that point they were still a year out, but the idea that no one was going to back us. Eventually, everyone was going to just leave the Palestinians behind. We have to do something about this. Make at least not go out quietly. And unfortunately, the realities 2 years on from Al Aqsa flood was that was not successful. That goal by the Palestinian resistance was not achieved. That certainly you don't have to look any farther than the UN Security Council resolution. That put the Trump, Witkoff, Netanyahu Gaza plan into international law. If you want to talk about if you need proof that the Palestinians have been abandoned and left on their own, there it was. Algeria, of all nations, votes against the Palestinians in that. They have no friends, no one who's willing to stand with them, with the exception of the Houthis. The rest of the countries that were supposedly in the axis of resistance with them have all been weakened. They've been shut down. They've been deterred by the Israelis. So again, you go back to this idea of the strategic success of the Israelis and the Americans over the last couple of years. It's undoubtable. I mean, it's we can go nation by nation if you want throughout the region, but that's there. And so I think there is that reality that has descended upon the Middle East that for the foreseeable future, Israel is dominant. And that as long as they have the Americans backing, which, despite public opinion polls and sentiment and what else in the US, I don't see that changing. I mean, does anyone doubt that this memorandum of understanding that provides the Israelis $3.8 billion a year that's coming to expire won't be renewed? Very possibly will be doubled to 20 years. And that 3.8 billion, if that's what we gave the Israelis back in 2015, what are we going to give them now? If we gave them almost 4 billion a year 10 years ago, we can give them 5 billion, 6 billion, $10 billion a year now. If Congress will do that, of course it will. No matter what the public opinion polls say. So, yeah, I mean, I think this is the awful reality that we're facing is that no matter how much we understood what the Palestinian resistance was attempting to achieve, how much we sided with them and backed them and supported them and sympathized with them, that they lost. And this is the awful reality that's facing not just the Palestinian people, but I think the entire region.